Hello, it's me, Anonymous, the hacker known as 4chan. What's up, everybody? Hey, it's me, Max. How's it going? Welcome in, everyone. How are we doing today? How was our weekend? How was our start of our week? How have things been going for everybody? Hope we're doing good. I hope we're doing good. You might be asking yourself, now, Max, why in the world are you wearing a mask like this with glasses on? And I'll let you know why whenever we get into our subject for the evening. But let's just say this stuff runs deep, cellar deep, all the way to the 5th of November. We are going to be talking today, ladies and gentlemen, about the very historically important event that didn't really do much, if I'm being honest. Very uneventful thing. But the Gunpowder Plot. And you might know that.
Wow, I just built the most amazing workflow on Monday.com.
Oh my god, no! Ads, stop. Well, we're going to be talking about Guy Fawkes and the Gunpowder Plot today, ladies and gentlemen, which is going to be amazing. It's going to be very epic, very cool. I'm hoping that you guys enjoy this one as much as you did the last one. I spent a lot of time on this one too, so yeah, so as we do every time that we do some of this type of stuff, we're going to watch a short video from the History Channel about the event, and then after we watch the little video, we will go into our presentation. I know everyone's ready for that. So give me 1 second. I actually do not have a good video on this one today. I tried to find them, and I had to go through like this really crappy BBC video that was like for children, I'm pretty sure. But it was not the greatest. Not the greatest video. I don't know who would have one. I hope History Channel does, but I really don't want to have to show you guys that really, really awful BBC one, because good God, it was horrible. Let me see. Well, Biographics has one, but it's 18 minutes long. Do we want to go through the Biographics one? I think it's fine. I think it should be fine. Let's pull this up real quick.
Gunpowder Plot for a long.
Oh. Here's what we'll do. Let me get back to here, and then let me switch over. We do not forgive, we do not forget. Yes, indeed. That's correct, Sacred Coral. Very true. We are the hacker known as 4chan Anonymous. Alright, let's see if I can pull this shit back up. Okay, do I have a mic on this one? I think I do. Yes, okay, I do. Alright, let me... Do I have window capture? Yes. Okay, there we go. We're gonna watch this little video. I'm hoping I'm gonna watch the entire video. I think... Oh, he goes through like every single one of them. Let me... We'll watch the... fuck it. Should we just watch it all? Do we ball? Do we just watch it all and ball? I don't want to get hit with a DMCA claim, but... I might have to for this one. No, I'm joking. I'm definitely not gonna get hit with one. At least not that you'll know.
Dirty?
Cool.
Ian?
Let us do this. Let me flip a coin, and then I will decide. Okay. All right, we're gonna watch it.
Remember the 5th of November, the gunpowder, treason, and plot. I know of no reason why the gunpowder treason should ever be forgot. On November the 5th, 1605, 13 men plotted together to blow up the Palace of Westminster in London on the day when the most powerful men in England were set to meet at Parliament. The authorities learned about the plan through...
Whoops. My bad, guys. I forgot to show it. And I need to make myself smaller. I apologize. Whoop. Okay.
An anonymous letter, and the terrorists were stopped just in time.
Anonymous.
The man they encountered at the scene was Guy Fawkes, who had been guarding barrels of gunpowder in the basement below the palace. If you're an American, you probably know about Guy Fawkes from the movie V for Vendetta, and you most likely associate him with anarchy. This association has been pushed even more in recent years with the use of Guy Fawkes masks by the anonymous organization. If you're from the UK, you already know about Guy Fawkes Night, which is celebrated every November the 5th with a bonfire and fireworks. Nearly everyone has heard of the famous Gunpowder Plot, but few people know details about Guy Fawkes' life or the motivations behind why he and his friends wanted to blow up Parliament in the first place. Even though this is a biography of his life, Guy Fawkes is really a very small part of the larger story. In order to fully understand the motivations behind the Gunpowder Plot, we first need to examine the conflicts between English Catholics and Protestants at that time. For a large part of human history, the most powerful religion in the world was the Roman Catholic Church. If a country was Catholic, its citizens looked up to the reigning pope as their religious leader. And in the minds of some, this authority was more important than the loyalty to their actual king or queen, because whoever has access to God has access to your mortal soul. In a lot of ways, the Protestant Reformation was a way to remove all of the power being held by the popes and bishops. It was sort of like cutting out the middleman for the average person's access to God. Because, you see, Catholics are taught that if you want your sins to be forgiven, you have to tell a priest every bad thing you've ever done in confession. A priest is sworn to secrecy, kind of like a therapist. But even so, everyone had the knowledge that these men held all of the deepest, darkest secrets of their congregation. Confession, it wasn't just encouraged, it's mandatory, and even the smallest sin left unsaid could mean you're going to hell. On top of that, Catholic Mass was said in Latin, so everyone needed to study the language. For the uneducated peasants, they needed to rely on a translation from their priest. Basically, the religion is set up in a way where priests and the Pope were given a huge amount of power over their congregation. In 1558, Elizabeth declared that there should be a settlement, which declared all English citizens must convert to Protestantism. Bishops that were formerly a part of the Catholic Church must renounce their loyalty to the Pope if they wanted to live. It was now mandatory for every English person to go to Protestant church services every Sunday, and they were taking attendance. If anyone missed one too many services, they were fined or even sent to jail. After hearing about this, Pope Pius V excommunicated Elizabeth from the Catholic Church. In 1570, he commanded a papal bull that encouraged all Catholics to depose her. Basically, this meant that they should no longer be loyal to their queen. He called her Elizabeth, the pretended Queen of England and the servant of crime. You can probably see why this was problematic, because Catholics in the country were now seen as enemy agents. People in the lower classes, they were quick.
So, I just want you all to know, Pope Pius and Queen Elizabeth, Pope Pius V specifically, fucking hated each other, dude. It was wild. She hated every Catholic, dude. So, if you don't know, prior to what we're going to be talking about, which is the Gunpowder Revolution, we're going to be talking a little bit about some of the stuff that Elizabeth did, specifically with the Spaniards, because they were her main rival at the time. The Spaniards are Catholics at the same time that Elizabeth and the Protestants are very, very powerful, and they have some hellacious wars between them, and it leads to a lot of contempt and resentment between the Protestants and the Catholics. This is also a time not so far off from whenever you've got Martin Luther and not Martin Luther, but you've got some very heavy religious fighting going on in mainland Europe. So what I'm trying to say is, if you hear some of these things about like Elizabeth or Pius, know that they have a very slanted bias towards one or the other. It's important to keep note of, because things that Elizabeth would say versus things that Pius would say are gonna kind of coat their impressions or thoughts of things heavily to be aligned with their religion. So just be aware of that, and let's continue with the video.
To convert to Protestantism, they could not afford to pay the hefty fines, and many of the illiterate peasants couldn't speak or read Latin anyway. It was an easy choice to make, and a symbol that they were loyal to their queen. But for the educated people of the upper class, this was not such an easy conversion. For one thing, this was taking away the freedom to choose their religion, and there were plenty of people who still truly believed that the Catholic Church was the one true church. These people, they were called recusants, which comes from the Latin word recusare, which means to refuse. For these people, who broke the law and continued to practice their Catholic faith, they believed that they were fighting for their immortal souls. It's quite the motivation. Since so much of the religion relies on a priest to say Mass and give confession, recusant Catholics began to hide priests in their homes. It was completely illegal, and harboring a priest was punishable by death. If a family was Catholic, the royal guard would show up unannounced at all times of day and ransack their homes looking for hidden priests. Upper-class Catholic families who refused to attend Protestant Mass, they continued to pay expensive fines to the point where they were losing all of their family's inheritance. Many English Catholics, they were forced to move to Flanders, which was a safe zone. After Elizabeth I's death, the Scottish King James VI took over the throne and became King James I of England. Catholic citizens had no idea how his reign would be any different than Elizabeth's, and they waited to see what would happen next.
We're coming up on a major fundraising deadline, and there aren't many more between now and the election.
We don't care.
So I am.
Get out of here.
So there's not very much that is known about Guy Fawkes' childhood, except that he was born in 1570 in York, England, to Edward and Edith Fawkes. His family had been Protestant, and his father even worked for the Church of England. They were law-abiding Protestants who went to church every Sunday. His mother came from a long line of Catholics, but she chose to give up her faith in favor of conforming. Guy Fawkes' father, he died when he was 8 years old, and his mother was a widow for years before she decided to marry a Catholic man. They began practicing the faith in secret, and they baptized Guy and his siblings in a secret ceremony in the St. Michael le Belfry Church. He attended St. Peter's School in York, which had a lot of recusant Catholic teachers and students. He was able to attend Mass in the homes of people who were hiding priests. As an adult, he chose to continue practicing that Catholic faith, and he became passionate about trying to protect it. At some point, Guy Fawkes is said to have gotten married and had a son. There are records from 1590 that a man named Guy Fawkes married a woman named Maria Pauline, and a birth certificate shows that their son, Thomas Fawkes, was born. When Guy Fawkes was 21 years old, he would have been old enough to take out his inheritance. That same year, there are documents of a lease and a 3.5-acre piece of land and home being signed by Guy Fawkes. This included the stamp of an image with a falcon, which was his family crest. He entered the service of Anthony Browne, the first Viscount of Montagu, as a footman. At that time, working in the service of a lord was considered to be a very respectable job among the lower class, especially compared to being a farmer. But for whatever reason, Browne did not like Guy Fawkes, so he fired him. Back then,
Because he didn't get him, dude. He didn't scroll through Reddit like Guy Fawkes would. He didn't understand the based Catholic religion like Guy Fawkes did. Obviously, these skeptics did not get him. They did not respect his religion that he chose. Typical non-Redditors, you know? No, I'm joking. No, I'm going to skip ahead a little bit because some of the stuff is a little bit... I kind of want to get to like the meat and potatoes of this because some of the stuff is like all background.
Man named Plot meant that it was the Earl of Northumberland to store firewood for winter. The day of Parliament kept getting delayed, and the group of conspirators grew from 5 to 13 men. Unfortunately for them, though, the extended time, combined with the greater number of people who were being told about the plot, meant that it was far more likely that the secret was going to get out. A Catholic man named Lord Monteagle was preparing to be present at Parliament. A masked man handed a letter to one of Monteagle's servants, and it was presented to him immediately. It said, "My lord, out of the love I bear to some of your friends, I have a care for your preservation. Therefore, I would advise you, as you tender your life, to devise some excuse to shift your attendance at this Parliament, for though there be no appearance of any stir, yet, I say, they shall receive a terrible blow." Even though it was late at night, Lord Monteagle quickly told his servants to ready the horses so that he could deliver the letter to Robert Cecil, the spymaster and Secretary of State to King James. Historians have debated over the theories of who actually wrote the anonymous letter. It could have been one of the 13 conspirators. It may even have been Monteagle himself writing a fake letter after hearing letters through the Catholic recusant grapevine. He was awarded £500 per year for his loyalty to the crown. Back then, that was a small fortune. Even more historians believe that it was Robert Cecil. He was the spymaster after all, and some believe that he knew about the Gunpowder Plot for a long time and orchestrated the entire scene to make himself seem like the hero. On the 4th of November, there was an extensive search of the Palace of Westminster. At first, they didn't find anything that concerned them, and they were beginning to believe that the letter was a hoax. But later that day, it was brought to the Royal Guard's attention that there were cellars underneath the palace that had not yet been searched. A royal official named Sir Thomas Knivett was told that one of them was being used for storing firewood, so he led a group of royal guards to search the area. When they arrived, they found Guy Fawkes guarding the firewood. Instead of wearing the clothes of a watchman, Fawkes was dressed in his riding boots, spurs, hat, and cloak as if he was getting ready to jump on a horse at any moment. They moved the wood piles aside to reveal 36 barrels of gunpowder. The royal guards searched him and found a box of long matches.
That's a lot of damage, if you like that. 36 barrels of gunpowder is like 2,500 to 5,000 kilograms of gunpowder, I think, which I believe is, I'm trying to remember the equivalent. I want to say it's like something crazy, like 100 sticks of dynamite or something like that. I'm trying to remember. One second. Trying to see where I found the actual, like, somewhere I was reading today had the actual, like, conversion of what it would have been equivalent to. Essentially, it would have really leveled the Parliament building. It would have been completely gone, or not completely gone, but it would have left a giant gaping hole and have killed everyone in, like, probably a 100-foot radius, or not 100-foot radius, but like 100 feet up. So, I mean, we're talking mass destruction from that point of view, and I think it's really funny because Guy Fawkes gets caught because he's wearing riding boots, because he knew that once he lit this fuse, he knew he had to get out of there as quickly as possible, because the fuse, apparently, according to legend, the fuse wasn't very long, so he was, like, literally, like, gonna have to, like, hold it, light it, and then run out the door, get on his horse, and just ride as fast as possible before that thing blew up. So they supposedly did that so that Fawkes would die, and that's not a real historical source, that's according to the things I've read. Supposedly it's a conspiracy theory that they actually tried to kill Guy Fawkes because they didn't want him to speak about it, because apparently he was very boastful. So that's kind of interesting. Was he blowing up or against the gunpowder barrels that this guy just said?
Fawkes, he was immediately arrested. On November the 6th, King James wanted to meet Guy Fawkes face to face. He interviewed him, asking if he had any regret. He genuinely wanted to know how anyone could be so ruthless and be willing to kill so many people, even the young children who would have been present at Parliament. Fawkes said that his only regret was that his plan had failed. Fawkes still called himself John Johnson, and he refused to give up the names of his co-conspirators. King James ordered that Fawkes be tortured and interrogated. He was suspended by manacles and then put on the rack so that his arms and legs were stretched and popped out of their sockets. He eventually caved and gave his confession. In the before and after of his signature, we can see that he could hardly write his own name after enduring so much pain. While Guy Fawkes was being tortured, the rest of the conspirators, they were on the run. Robert Catesby began to announce to the villagers that King James was dead, and he called for the Catholics to rise up and reclaim their rightful place in the kingdom. They rode from town to town, but instead of the huge army he expected, there were only about 40 men who decided to follow him. Ironically, Catesby and his men, they accidentally blew themselves up with their own gunpowder that they'd brought with them. Without Guy Fawkes there to help them with his expertise, they thought that in order to dry out the damp, they should sprinkle their gunpowder in front of an open fireplace. It exploded, of course, and one of the men went blind. The rest were now burned and injured. One man asked Robert Catesby what they were going to do next. He replied, "We mean here to die." On November the 8th, the Sheriff of Warwickshire showed up with a small army of 200 men. There was a shootout between the two groups. The weakened Catholic men did their best to go out fighting, but it was clear that the King's Guard was going to overpower them. Robert Catesby was shot, but he crawled to the nearby chapel. He was found on the floor of the church, hugging a statue of the Virgin Mary. The men who were left alive were taken prisoner and sentenced to hang in the gallows along with Guy Fawkes.
Oh, no.
This game.
Another rat. Get out of here. Get.
You're not.
On the 31st of January, 1606, Guy Fawkes and his fellow conspirators were found guilty of treason, and their punishment would have been to be hanged, drawn, and quartered. This meant that a man was dragged through the streets before he was hanged in the gallows. But just before he was about to choke to death, they would let him go. As he gasped for breath, they would dig a knife into his stomach and pull out his entrails. Then they chopped off his arms and his legs while he was still alive. Then the 4 quarters of the body were taken to the 4 corners of England. As Guy Fawkes stood in the crowd, King James declared that these Catholic traitors were trying to blow up the entire island of England. This would have been physically impossible, of course, but it was enough to make the people extremely angry. They were screaming and booing, calling him a traitor. Before they could torture him, Guy Fawkes jumped, breaking his own neck. Even though he was not alive to feel the pain, they still went through with cutting his body apart into pieces. The Gunpowder Plot had very nearly succeeded, and if it were not for an anonymous letter, Guy Fawkes may have actually succeeded at lighting the fuse. If the barrels of gunpowder had exploded, it would have been powerful enough to bring down the palace and nearby buildings. It would have killed the king and the princes, as well as some of the most powerful noblemen in the country. This would have left the throne to James's daughter, Princess Elizabeth. They had hoped that since she was so young, she would be easy to manipulate as a sort of puppet. Many believed that Robert Catesby would have eventually gotten more Catholics to follow him, and this would have erupted into an English civil war. After this incident, Parliament passed the Thanksgiving Act of 1606, which was a law that English citizens must pray and give thanks to God that the terrorists did not kill the king. That day became known as Guy Fawkes Night, or Bonfire Night, and it's celebrated every year on November the 5th. People usually celebrate by building a large bonfire and burning life-size dummies of Guy Fawkes. There is also a fireworks show to symbolize the explosions that never happened. Since then, everyone has always remembered the 5th of November. So I really hope you found that.
Oh, thanks, Simon Whistler. That was very informative. Thank you, sir. I really enjoyed that. Wow. Wasn't that lovely, everyone? I really enjoyed that, actually. Let me put on some music for you fine folks. I just need to finish up one last thing on our little slideshow here. And then we will get right into it.
Why?
Right. Close out Mr. Whistler here. I think it was kind of an informative video, though. Or it was an informative video. The infographic show always has like some pretty solid, overviews on just a lot of stuff. Honestly, like he made although I think he's been called out a lot for like making up stuff apparently, so maybe not the greatest, I don't know. I like his videos. They're at the very least entertaining, but go into them with a grain of salt, knowing from what I've heard he does make up stuff sometimes. I don't have any proof to back up that claim, I've just heard that. So, yeah. Anyways, I am just finishing up my sources list, and then I will and we will get started. Bonfire night. I don't know how common it is still in Australia. That's insane behavior. What's insane behavior? The throwing the doll on the bonfire. It is pretty weird, though. Whenever I was listening to this, I was like, I had always heard about like the 5th of November, so I didn't really I knew like loosely about Guy Fawkes. I didn't really know a lot about Guy Fawkes. So whenever I was like going through this, and I got to the part where they started talking about like celebrating Guy Fawkes Night, and they were like, oh yeah, they like have a little effigy of him and they throw him onto a pyre. It's so crazy. Oh, the YouTuber? Oh, the YouTuber's kind of interesting too. Yeah, I don't know. I was just gonna share my thoughts. My bad. Sorry, Sacred Coral. I'm sorry. I'm sorry I offended you. My fault. I was just yapping. Sorry. My fault. My bad. Okay. Okay. Let's get into it, ladies and gentlemen. We are gonna go over the Gunpowder Plot. Gunpowder Plot by Max Forge. All right, here's the who, what, when, the where, and the why. So, we are, let me pull this up real quick. I gotta pull up to my very top. So, what was the Gunpowder Plot? What was the point? So, it was the failed plan to assassinate the King of England, specifically King James I, by a group of English Catholics. Their plan was to essentially overthrow the king by killing him and then institute a Catholic monarch in his place. Specifically, I believe it was his cousin Elizabeth, who was a Catholic ruler or a Catholic noble. So she is, I believe, Scottish, if I'm remembering right, but I'll have to fact check myself on that one, so don't take that with a grain of salt. So who were the plotters? So the two most recognizable of these that you're gonna hear are gonna be Robert Catesby and Guy Fawkes. There were also 11 other conspirators that would come into here. People like John Wright, Christopher Wright, who is his brother, Thomas Percy, I think it's Thomas Wheeler or something like that as well. Thomas Winter, Robert Winter, and a few other people that all kind of rope their way in and become a part of the plot. But the two that you really need to know, Robert Catesby, Guy Fawkes. Why were they planning this? So, like, as I said, they wanted to place Catholic monarch on the throne. This was very, very, very close after the union between Scotland and England. If you don't know, Scotland was Catholic at this time. They were not Protestants, really. They made a union where they married, they didn't marry. Elizabeth I, who was unmarried and had no kids. It was the end of her line. So they were going to pass it on to her sister, who was Mary, Queen of Scots. She was the wife of, I believe it's James III, and they had a son together who is James IV, who is the King of Scotland. James IV becomes James I, and he is now the King of England and Scotland. So that is the Great Britain, or the Union of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Scotland that we're talking about. So that's where we get these terms from. United Kingdom comes from this. So when and where did the plot take place? So it actually took place specifically, not including the actual plotting itself, but the plan that was enacted upon was in a cellar underneath the House of Lords at Westminster Palace in London, England, from November 4th to the 5th. That is the dates that are going to be touched on for this plan itself. So let me go on to the next part here. So, what was the religious political climate of England at this time? What really led to such hostilities? Well, we're going to go back and we're going to touch on Elizabeth I and her little rivalry she had with Pope Pius and V and the Spaniards. So, Elizabeth, she is a big time Protestant. She obviously, if you know anything about England, before Queen Elizabeth I, they made their own religion, essentially. It was called the Anglican Church. It was made by Henry VIII so that he could divorce and essentially really no reason to divorce his wife aside from she couldn't give him a son or a male heir. So he devised his own church where he was the head. So the monarch of England, whoever it is the head of the Church of England, or an Anglican. They are the head of the church. That is what gives them not only the divine right to rule, but also gives them more power within the religious sphere too, because they say what can and cannot go. And you still see the impacts of this today, reaching all the way down to Queen Elizabeth II, actually, and her son, who is now the king, it goes, it's very wide reaching from Henry VIII till then. But Mary, or excuse me, not Mary, but Elizabeth. I keep saying Mary because I see Mary, Queen of Scots on the screen. Elizabeth herself is very, very heavily into the Church of England. Makes a great deal about ending Catholicism. She really does not like Catholics. She was alive and queen during a time right after Martin Luther and his, I think it was the 99 Theses was his thing that he made, essentially against the Catholic Church, which made the Protestant religions like Lutheranism and Calvinism become more mainstream, led to a lot of fights throughout Europe. She was alive during these times where there was heavy, heavy, heavy religious warfare. And it consistently went on up until probably the mid to late 1600s, if I'm remembering correctly. And this is just fellow Christians fighting between who is a Catholic versus who is a Protestant. These wars were very deadly. They had a lot of wide-ranging impacts on who controlled what, and who would be in charge of what, and who had religious freedoms. A lot of these people who did not end up getting these religious freedoms would go on to colonize America because of the amount of religious persecution that they faced. And one of these groups were the Catholics. A lot of them were brought over on the boats to what we now know as Boston and the area of Massachusetts after the Pilgrims arrived, and those people spread out from there. But at this time specifically, there was very heavy religious persecution of Catholics, and they really were just not given the same legal rights as Protestants at this time. They couldn't own certain types of land. They could not hold public office or positions of power. The Protestants would consolidate their wealth and their land ownership and their access to markets and kind of take it away from Catholics, or at least try to heavily push them out of the field in order to kind of consolidate more of their power. And the Church of England, the Anglican Church, really encouraged these people to do it. The Church of England was far more fair to people who were Lutherans and Calvinists rather than Catholics, which is impressive to me, considering they were a newer religion. But it makes sense given that a lot of the stuff got passed down from monarch to monarch, and now you're ending up, this is still in Elizabeth's time, into James I's time, heavy religious persecution. Catholics were subject to various forms of legal and social discrimination. Penal laws were enacted. They imposed fines, they imposed property confiscations, imprisonment for anyone who didn't attend Anglican Mass. So these people were recusants, which is what Simon Whistler talked in his video. Apparently, they were essentially people who would go to Anglican Mass, and then they couldn't go to Catholic Mass because they were essentially barred from having their own Mass. So they would do it in private or in little hidden ceremonies so that they weren't found out about. So it was very, very bad time to be a Catholic in England. So the picture that I have right here is it's a raid and a search and an arrest of an Elizabethan Catholic household by Protestant authorities. Stuff like this, scenes like this. So if you look over here, it's very dark, but this guy's essentially grabbing stuff out of a chest. This is the house. You have like a magistrate right here, armed guards, and they're leading out Catholics from here. Specifically, there's a priest right here, and that's how we know what it's depicting. But stuff like this was very, very common, not only just Catholics, but Jews as well in this area during this time. So Catholics, after Elizabeth died, sorry, I needed water. Catholics after Elizabeth died were really hoping that James IV, now James I, after his coronation, would be more tolerant of Catholics, considering his mother who was Mary Queen of Scots, who was a Catholic. She was a Catholic queen. They thought he would be more lenient because of his mother. Now James was sworn in, and he was forced to become a Anglican in order to essentially rule England, and he did so. But whenever he got in, unfortunately, he maintained a lot of the pro-Protestant policies that his forebears had enacted, and it really led to a lot of resentment. There was a lot of public fear and distrust of Catholics as well, but this was kind of exacerbated because of Spain and Pope Pius V specifically. Spain was England's #1 rival at this time. They had the Spanish Armada, which was a large ship, or a large an armada of ships that went up to England and tried to essentially destroy England and invade it. They tried to destroy their navy, but the English navy actually succeeded in stopping them. And this was in, I believe, 1588, so only 15 to 20 years before James I assumes the throne. People were still reeling from that. They were still suffering the wounds. And obviously Catholic Spain, even during James's time, was still a big, big enemy for them. And it helped fuel the fire for why people didn't like Catholics, because they would be going to war with them. They would come back home. They would see Catholics in their neighborhoods, and they would be very distrustful of them. And furthering that, there would be instances where Jesuits, which is a Catholic order, they would be very active in supporting English Catholics that were accused by English authorities of like trying to form rebellions or enact sedition, which is essentially like plotting against the government to assassinate or kill or overthrow or what have you. But the Jesuits would essentially hide them, and they wouldn't really give them up to police. So they were very, very heavily involved with things like that, and a lot of the time they were actually seen as like agents of the Pope, like the Secret Service kind of thing. But that was essentially how that mistrust kind of played in. So one other thing, or a few things that happened, there were actually several like attempts on Protestant rulers throughout Europe, and also in England, which we'll touch the English in a bit. But 1589, during the French Wars of Religion, I think it was King Henry III. He was actually mortally wounded with a dagger by a man named Jacques Clement, who was a member of the Catholic League of France. 9 years after that, there was a Jesuit named Juan de Mariana. So this is in 1599. He wrote a book called On Kings and the Education of Kings. And actually, he argued in support of a thing called tyrannicide, which is your right to overthrow a tyrannical leader should you see it fit, and by any means necessary, literally meaning you should overthrow and or kill the tyrant in order to get him out if everything else fails. And it actually talked about Henry III and his being killed by Clement, and it actually argued that he had a legal right to do that. And it was very, very distasteful to many Protestants, specifically rulers, because they were essentially saying that regicide is justifiable, or essentially to especially somebody like the Queen or King of England, who is the head of the church. They're essentially saying it's okay to kill the head of your church because they're a tyrant, because they're not Catholic. So they don't really have the religious right. They don't have that moral authority. And if they're actually a tyrant, it doesn't matter regardless. So something very important to keep in mind, religious tensions were very, very high during this time. So just be aware, have that in the back of your mind whenever we start going forward with this talk. Let's move on to the next one. The religious political climate of England. This is a continuation of it. we're going to talk more about the government side of this stuff now. So, government corruption and inefficiency has always been a thing, but specifically during James's time, whenever he was coming in, they had just established, towards the end of Elizabeth's rule, the Dutch East India Company, or excuse me, not the Dutch East India Company. Yeah, no, I believe that is right. Yeah, Dutch East India Company and some of these others from the Dutch, they actually purchased them, and they became English trading companies. So they're monopolies essentially on these trades. And the government was responsible for giving these things over to these people. So specifically, they sold off titles and offices that would be very important for getting your political stature up or having some type of power and authority in an area. So, for instance, if you were a fisherman and you didn't want your competitor to have fishing rights in the, I don't know, the English Channel, and you had a little bit of money hanging around, you would go up to a government official, you would take a big bag of money, you would slam it on his desk and say, hey, I want the rights to essentially be the master of fishing. And what the master of fishing can do is he can make essentially lines in the water to where if somebody crosses that line, they get fined. And if these lines don't have to be equal because this person is in charge of it, he can essentially make these lines whatever way he wants and say, oh, I just made a new addition to the line. I actually control all of this water, and you don't control anything except for this little section. And if somebody crosses over that line, they could fine you. So stuff like this was very common, and it led to a lot of corruption, a lot of issues with people, specifically poor people, having some sense of, I guess, not entitlement, but a sense of like the monarchy doesn't really care about us. They'd rather sell off titles and let people who are better well off than we are essentially do whatever they want. Ironic. Which very, very ironic coming into what we're about to talk about. So they would sell off exclusive rights to certain trades, and they would also make monopolies. So Dutch East India Company is a great example of this. They controlled the entire trade routes down in the southeast and over to the Atlantic. That would be the entire spice trade. That would be salt and pepper and cardamom and any of these spices that they would have back in these times. And it led to a lot of issues with people trying to start their own businesses, which then started stilting the economy, which led to severe economic hardships on people. These severe economic hardships were really, really exacerbated too by heavy inflation due to lavish overspending by the king. So there was a thing called the Addled Parliament, which was in, I believe, 1604. And it essentially was a time where the Parliament did not pass any new laws because they were split right down the middle on how they should solve these issues. And it didn't help matters that half of them were loyal to the king and the other half were not, or had some type of issue with the king. So in 1604, when the Addled Parliament was happening, one of the big things that happened was he requested more subsidies from the Parliament to address his financial difficulties, specifically his lavish spending, which included the purchasing of expensive gifts. He would support like very, very expensive diplomatic missions to other Protestant kingdoms. He funded a humongous household, and it led to a lot of friction with Parliament, and it later caused even greater strife later on in his reign, which we're not going to talk about, but is important to know. So they didn't pass the subsidies to him, so they had to find a new way to get money. So they instituted new taxes and stuff like that, and it really led to heavy inflation. They were overspending like a ton, lots. The pound like saw something, I believe it was like a 57% increase in the cost of food. Or excuse me, the pound itself saw a 57% increase in inflation. So a pound was now worth 43 pence, I believe is how that conversion works, which is insane. But moving on, they also had really, really bad class division that formed during this time. And I'm talking about humongous class division. We're kind of touching on the monopolies. You would have somebody who was a merchant down the street from you, and if you were a merchant and didn't have enough money, or you didn't come from a wealthy family, that merchant would get rich, and then your business would no longer exist, which then would lead to you losing your business, or having to start some new job, and the only thing you know how to do is, in this case, you would fish. So you can't do fishing anymore, so you have to go pick up a new trade. So it led to a lot of poor people, and a lot of the somewhat middle class of merchants becoming very skewed in how extreme their wealth was. But these are the outside factors that we're going to be talking about with the plot itself. So let's talk about some of the previous plots against James I. This gentleman over here is Mr. Sir Walter Raleigh. If you might have heard of Sir Walter Raleigh, that's who Raleigh, North Carolina is named after. And we're going to touch on him in just a second. So there were two plots specifically against the king. Very, very close in time frame to each other. The by plot and the main plot. And I have just remembered that I actually have a timeline I forgot to give you guys. I made it all by my lonesome. So I will plug that in just a second. So essentially what happens is, in 1603, right, the by plot and the main plot are kind of getting talked about. They're kind of getting made by Sir Walter Raleigh. He's the head of this entire thing. But what happens is William Watson and William Clark, who are they're two priests, they're Catholic priests specifically, they were more concerned with actually having more religious rights and not so much overthrowing the king himself. So they had a disagreement with Sir Walter Raleigh, in which they split off from the main part of the main plot, and they made the thing called the by plot. It's called the by plot because it's literally overlooked a lot, so they say bye to it. But it's actually very instrumental in discovering the main plot. So essentially, shortly after James I's ascension to the throne, they start planning to overthrow him with a woman named Arabella Stuart. She's Lady Arabella Stuart, and she's a part of the Stuart dynasty, which is the same as James. I'm not quite sure how she's related, but she is a Catholic lady, and they want to put her on the throne instead of James. And the entire plot is led by Sir Walter Raleigh and some of his associates, and it really involved a lot of military force capitalizing on discontent from some of the nobility, and it had a lot of ifs, ands, and buts attached to it, which understandable how it failed. But in 1603, whenever the by plot is being led by William Watson and William Clark, one of them, I believe it was William Clark, I forgot to write that down. William Clark essentially doesn't like how the planning for the plot's going. A lot of people are going more and more towards, wait, well, if we can't kidnap this guy, which is what they were trying to do, we shouldn't do the plot, because we should just have to kill him or whatever. So the by plot is essentially, they want to go to this area of the country that the king is going to be in. They want to grab him, snatch him up, kidnap him, and then force him to give religious rights to Catholics. They just want to get religious rights. So after that, after they start discussing, well, maybe we should actually just kill the king, a lot of those people who are the conspirators go back to the main plot, and the ones that are left get betrayed by William Clark whenever he goes to the authorities and essentially says, hey, we got this guy who's trying to kidnap the king. He's a Catholic man like me, and I'm trying to turn him in so that I can win some favor from you guys. So that's what ends up happening. They arrest the conspirators of the biplot, and then they torture them. So what ends up happening is that the biplot, since it was a part of the main plot early on, and had a lot of conspirators that were kind of roped into both of these, they end up spilling the beans on the main plot as well. And they implicate Sir Walter Raleigh, and Sir Walter Raleigh is then like chased down, and he gets discovered in 1603. He gets imprisoned, and then he gets released later on in 1616 so that he can go to the New World and set up Virginia. Yay! And then later on, he raids a Spanish port and kills a lot of people, and he gets put to death by, funnily enough, James I. Later on, I believe, is 1628. But so it comes full circle. He still got what he deserved. So, moving on. The plotting begins. So, Robert Catesby, disillusioned with the new king after seeing that he's not going to be putting up with the Catholics very, very much. Essentially, in early 1604, he decides he's going to start doing something about the king. He starts recruiting other Catholics who are wealthy and well-to-do and well-known, have somewhat of a military background, and he starts getting these people in. Now, knowing what we know about the plots, the king actually doubles down on the religious persecution of Catholics at the time after these two plots that attempted to kill him or kidnap him. He doubles down on it. So this leads to Robert Catesby kind of going in and being like, okay, this guy's delusional. He's not gonna. We're insane for even thinking that because his mother's Catholic, he's gonna help us out, because he's not. He hates us. And in fact, we think he's worse than Elizabeth was for us. So he ends up recruiting 5 guys at first: Guy Fawkes, Thomas Winter, John Wright, and Thomas Percy. And they all meet in London in May of 1604, and this is what is known as the beginning of the Gunpowder Plot. Now, a little bit of backstory about Robert Catesby. He's a very devout Catholic. He had actually been involved with some of the other conspiracies against the crown. Specifically, I think it was called the Essex Revolution or the Essex Rebellion. This is in 1601. And Catesby was really, really motivated to end the persecution of Catholics and put a Catholic monarch on the throne. So he starts, like I said, recruiting these other Catholics who shared his views and are willing to take these drastic measures. And he comes across specifically a man named Guy Fawkes. Guy Fawkes is a very experienced soldier with explosives. Has a long history of fighting and being very, very good with blowing up things. He's destroyed many castles. He's destroyed a lot of different buildings. He was a bombardier, a grenadier for a time, or something equivalent to a grenadier early on in the English army. And he was actually introduced to Catesby by Thomas Winter. So they meet in London to discuss these plans, and they agreed on an initial plan to blow up Parliament. And the reason why they say this is because, well, they opened up at the House of Lords. All of these lords are Protestant nobility. Not only that, all of the other side of Parliament is going to be there because they open up Parliament to both sides of it at the House of Lords so that they begin their opening ceremony. The king will be there. All the king's heirs will be there. We can wipe them all out in one swift stroke if we play this right. So that's where they set their mark. And that is why they wanted to get them all. Fawkes becomes super integral to this plan because they decide on gunpowder. And I'm going to touch on why they decided about gunpowder in a bit. A lot of it has to do with Fawkes's expertise in explosives, but there's more reasons to it. So they want to get more people involved. So Fawkes himself actually ends up recruiting 8 more people into this conspiracy to kill the king. And it leads to, obviously, a lot more mouths and ears hearing and saying plans that, maybe they shouldn't be saying, but they're going to anyways. So they all swear to secrecy, that they are not going to tell anything under penalty of death. They are not sharing anything with these people. If anyone shares anything, they're going to be killed on the spot. If we find out about it, even if it's a rumor, we're killing you. So that's what they agree on. Everyone signs this pact, and that's how they end up making this plot, the beginnings of this plot, right? So after that happens, and after we start seeing the initial planning of this start to come into fruition, we start asking ourselves, why did they choose gunpowder, right? What was the point of, why in the world would you use gunpowder for? So there's a lot of different reasons we can give. Big one, Guy Fawkes' explosives expertise. A lot of gunpowder is needed for some of his things that he would make. He was specifically very good at blowing up things with a lot of gunpowder. So that makes sense. But this is where we start seeing, I think, a lot of ties, what I see with this, to what we see with modern day terrorism, which is they want to cause the biggest explosion possible so enough people see it. They want to kill enough people that it makes an impact. Specifically for this one, it's a political impact, so it's political terrorism. And they want to wipe out a lot of these Protestant nobility so that they don't have a head figure for their people. They just want to get them out of here. So it's also a little bit symbolic, I think, to Catholics. This is one of the thoughts on why they chose the gunpowder that they did, because apparently there is something symbolic about wiping out Protestant Christians with a fire, right? It's a religious cleansing of sorts. It's a cleansing by fire. So whenever they go into this, they start thinking of these things and they're like, oh, okay, well, this makes sense to do this because it's obviously the most effective way, but there's other factors that could have played into it. Obviously, they could have just went in and just, strapped up, like a powder keg to themselves, but it wouldn't have been as effective. They had to do it this way in order to cause the biggest effect and the biggest reverberation throughout the kingdom. So that's where we lead into the actual plot itself. So let's get on to the next point. So, executing the plot. So the plotters rent a cellar from, I believe, is the Lord of Northumbria, underneath the House of Lords. And this guy is like, why are you guys wanting to rent this? And they essentially are like, well, we're going to be celebrating the king coming to town. We're going to celebrate the opening of Parliament. We want a place to store some of our firewood and stuff like that. So, why don't we? Can we just use it for our firewood because we're going to have a big bonfire and celebrate and this, that, and the other. And they're like, yeah, okay, sounds reasonable. It's a big event. The king coming to town for the second Parliament that he's ever declared. So, or third Parliament he's ever declared. Yeah, that makes sense to me. Go ahead. So they rent this, and they use it with the pretext of storing firewood. What they end up using it for is they start placing 36 barrels of gunpowder into the cellar. That gunpowder is equivalent to, like I said earlier, 2,500 to 5,000 kilograms of gunpowder, like explosives. So they bring it in, they wheel it in, start putting it in there, and they start like fusing it up. They start putting the fuses in. Guy Fawkes is over there drilling holes, putting fuses into it, lighting it all up. They put it up against this wall, specifically underneath where they think the king and his family is going to be sitting. So they all leave, right? Everyone except for Fawkes. And Fawkes is left so that he can do the deed. This is actually a artist recreation of Guy Fawkes lighting the fuse. Or pouring the gunpowder, rather, to light the fuse. So essentially what happens is Fawkes is left to guard these barrels, and he's given a costume to wear. It's a costume of a servant. It's not a night watchman or anything like that. It's just a servant. But he has these boots on that are not servant's boots. He's wearing like very well-to-do clothing underneath his servant's clothes. And so what they don't know is that there's a check going on for any type of weird or strange activities. So whenever these guards come up to the start of the cellar where Guy Fawkes is sitting at, and they start asking him to open up the cellar, he's like, "Oh, well, it's just firewood down there. There's nothing major. It's just firewood. No issues." They tell him to move aside, and they open it up, and they see these barrels, and they see gunpowder on the floor, and they're like, "Is that 36 barrels of gunpowder?" And he's like, "No, it's 36 logs of wood, obviously, duh." And he rolls a skill check on his charisma, and he critically fails. He gets arrested immediately. He is not giving up any reason as to why there's so much gunpowder underneath there. So they take it as a sign as this is what they've been tipped off to. And we'll talk about the tipping off in the next slide. Fawkes is arrested, interrogated, and thrown into some type of an abdominal stretch machine, essentially. They stretch out his arms and legs. They torture him for a couple of days, and they bring him to the king in his bedchamber. And the king's like, "Hey, dude, that's kind of fucked up. You're trying to kill me and my family. That's kind of messed up. That's there's kids in there. There's like it's not just me. It's like other people too. Like if you're mad at me, like you could just go for me." And the guy's like, "Fuck you. I don't care. Guy Fawkes doesn't give a fuck." And so he essentially like spits at the king's feet, and the king's like, "All right, motherfucker, okay." So they throw him back in the jail, and the king essentially issues this edict that says, "Hey, I need somebody to form up a group and go chase after these guys, because all of these conspirators, after they hear that Fawkes is arrested, essentially start leaving London in droves. They start fleeing. They go on horseback and they try to run away. But as they're leaving, they're trying to incite, or before that, they were trying to incite a rebellion against the king. They were saying that the king's dead, that Parliament's gone. There's an explosion happening right now that's going to kill them all. If you're a Catholic, grab your arms and let's go fight." And like no one rises up because no one's heard this at all. They have no way of knowing if that's true. And so most people don't do anything. They just sit there and they're like, "You got proof?" And they're like, "Yeah, we're the ones who planned all this." And so Catesby and like all these guys essentially just implicated themselves in the plot. And so all these people who are from London essentially are just telling on themselves and saying that we're going to kill the king. We're going to kill the queen. Like, it makes no sense. But it's like the exact perfect type of plot for a 1600s political intrigue that I'm here for. So they tell on themselves, and then they get on their horses and leave town after they hear the news about Fawkes. And the sheriff of Worcestershire, Worcestershire W sauce, ends up getting tasked to find these plotters, and he creates a posse. He starts chasing them out of town. So on to our next slide. This is William Parker, the Baron of Monteagle, right here, the 4th Baron of Monteagle. So you might be asking yourself, how how in the world was this plot discovered? Well, there was a little anonymous letter that got sent to Mr. Parker here. And it essentially reads like a friend telling another friend, don't come to school tomorrow. There's about to be a shooting. It's essentially how it's written. He's like, well, the note's essentially like, you know, I don't think you should go to Parliament. If you have like an excuse, I would use it. Not saying that there's gonna be anything that happens. Nudge, nudge, wink, wink. But I think they're doomed. I think they might be getting fucked up. Don't come to Parliament on the 5th. And so Parker does what any normal human being, I think, even back then would do if he gets told this. He takes it to the authorities, specifically the spy master, to the king. And he goes, I think you guys need to check this out. And so the spy master has these guards that come out, and they do checks of the entire Parliament grounds over the first, like, the next couple of weeks. So once the day before happens, somebody informs them, like, they just tells them out of the blue, they're like, hey, you guys check the cellars underneath the Parliament, right? And they're like, there's cellars under Parliament? And it becomes another issue. They're like, oh, there's cellars under Parliament? I had no idea. What do you mean there's cellars under Parliament? And so this guy shows them to where the cellars are, and that's where they see Guy Fawkes literally just standing there in like this noble clothing overlaid by paupers' clothes. And they're like, oh, that's a bit suspicious. Maybe we should ask this young man what he's seen. And they're like, hey, dude, what's going on? And that's where we got our stuff about Guy Fawkes. That's what happens. So who wrote the note is still not even known today. There's a few theories on who it could have been, but no one knows definitively. So I do want to tell you all that initially before I even say this next part, because it's very important to know that, because people like to throw out guesses about stuff, or they say that stuff is like a political fact whenever it isn't. So very important to get your facts straight. So there is a man named, I think it's James Teacham. And Teacham is some form of an accomplice early on, and ends up leaving the group. Or, excuse me, not Teacham, it's Tresham. Francis Tresham, that's his name. Tresham is, he's actually a member of the plot. And he was widely believed at the time to be the person who wrote the letter, because Lord Monteagle's actually his brother-in-law. And he wanted to warn Monteagle because he liked him a lot. But there's no solid evidence to support this, and I think they actually asked him in imprisonment, like whenever they were interrogating him, like, did you write the letter? And he's like, nah, I don't know what you're talking about. I don't know what letter you're talking about. So we don't really know if that's really true. The only real evidence we have to go off of is circumstantial evidence. I would likely believe it's him just because of family loyalty. I think he did like his brother-in-law, but could be wrong. The other person that is actually suspected of this is Monteagle himself, because a lot of historians actually think that Monteagle could have been complicit in actually fabricating the letter and kind of embellishing its contents to appear as like a hero. So a lot of the time Monteagle comes off as like this person, at least in what we know about him, he comes off this person who wants to be more important than what he actually is. He wants to be a very critical person, like a critical member of some elaborate plot. So supposedly he gets in with the Gunpowder Plot and then backs out later on, because his obviously brother-in-law is Tresham, and so Tresham ends up essentially giving him a way in to the group, and then gives him a way out because he's like, well, Tresham's like he's a baron, he can't really be in the plot or whatever, but he tells him about it, and then just because he was Tresham's brother-in-law, he writes this fake letter to himself, and then just tells himself not to come to school. He just assumes that it's going to be on the 5th of November. So other people that might have been involved were Thomas Percy and Thomas Winter, or Robert Catesby himself. No one really knows, but these people are alleged to be the people who might have done it. I think Francis Tresham himself is the most likely of these people. I think Lord Monteagle is probably the second most likely. I definitely don't think it's Catesby, and I definitely don't think it's Percy or Winter. So out of those two, I would say probably Tresham. But moving on to their next stuff. So Justice Against the Conspirators. The Search. So the Sheriff of Worcester rides out of London, and he's searching all around, and he finds this encampment. And this encampment has like these scorch marks all over it. And what ended up happening is supposedly Robert Catesby and his men try to blow up something. They try to like learn how to like use the gunpowder so they can go back and try to blow up Parliament later on. And because they've told on themselves now, everybody knows who they are. And not only that, but the people who are going to be important to, lighting the gunpowder are going to be people who are actually advanced in it. So what they end up doing is they make this like powder, like this giant mound of gunpowder, and they try to light it, and they're like looking directly at it instead of making a long line, and they essentially blow themselves up. So a bunch of them have like a bunch of like 3rd-degree burns and like cuts and scrapes and bruises and like bruised faces and stuff like that. And like I think one of the guy actually dies, but they're like joined by other people who are rising up against the king with them. And there's, I think, about 11 in total, including Catesby and Richard Walsh, who is the sheriff of Worcester. He ends up riding up to the camp, and he follows these tracks. And they lead to a place called Holbech House. And Holbech House is up in what's the Birmingham area. So it's northwest of London by horseback, probably 3 days, or a day, 2 days, 3 days, something like that. And he finds these people by following tracks and asking people and kind of just normal tracker stuff to find these guys. And so when he comes across them, he's like, hey, you stinky Catholics, get out of that house or we're going to shoot you out. And Robert Catesby says, how about you go fuck yourself, and starts shooting out the window with his flintlock pistol. And so Walsh has a posse of about 200 soldiers and militiamen. And he's like, okay, fuck it. And so they just unload like a volley and start trying to like come into the building and like attack them. They end up killing 4 of the people, including Catesby himself. And they end up wounding and capturing 7 of the men. Catesby and I believe one other conspirator from the original plot, or maybe 2 of them, are killed in the gunfire. And the other ones are just people who they picked up along the way. Some actually theorize that some of the people who were in the house that were not actually Catholic, or who were Catholic but were not a part of the conspiracy, who were just in there being servants and stuff like that, were actually shot as well, and they said that they were a part of it, but we don't really know. Very important for context. These are English Anglicans that we're talking about, and history is written by the victors. So let's make sure that we know that before we start talking about some of this stuff. At the trial, after these guys are captured, they end up capturing the rest of the accomplices somehow, some way. There's like this goose chase where they just kind of are like finding them in woodworks all across the London and surrounding towns. They end up getting all of them, and the way that they found out who they all were is not only because they told on themselves, but also because Guy Fawkes, after 2 straight days of torture, ends up divulging every single one of the names to the English authorities. So they now know who these people are, they know who their families are, and they start tracking their families, and they're saying, hey, if you don't give us the name of this guy, or you don't tell us where he's hiding, we're going to start beating the absolute dog shit out of you, or we are going to take your land. Something is going to happen to you, and it's not going to be nice. So they end up giving out all their family members, which, smart in my opinion. Not the greatest loyalty, but smart. And they get sent to trial, because this is England after all. We're not barbarians. We have trials in this country, damn it. And the trials are preceded by the plotters being interrogated and tortured for 3 straight months. They are all beaten. They are all put on various forms of torture devices. They are all told to divulge any more names to make sure that everyone who they had was gotten. I believe this leads to the arrest of a couple of priests. And some of these priests, I believe, are very... like, they don't really have anything to do with it. They're just Jesuits. But remember what we said earlier about Jesuits. If you're a Jesuit, you're a servant of the Pope. You are seen as a CIA member, essentially, for the Pope. So there's a specific guy named Henry Garnet who gets put on trial as well for his sedition, is what they say. But it's not really sedition. There's not really anything to prove it. But what they end up doing is they put him on trial anyways with the accused and charge him with high treason. Henry Garnet, a few others. But they end up going to trial. The trial lasts all of about, I think, a week. There's not really any... I didn't see any supporting evidence for any length of the trial. Some people say it was only a day. Some people said it was a week. It was very quick, though. We know it's quick. And because a lot of these guys are known about, they see that they actually have a lot of roles to play in stuff like fighting against the Spanish in the Netherlands, or suppressing the Dutch revolt, or having other things against the king earlier in life. And the king's reading all these charges that these people have been convicted of or accused of prior, and he's starting to say to himself, maybe I should really start cracking down on political opponents and any Catholics that I see. So what ends up happening is, after the trial, they're all found guilty, every single one of them, including the Jesuit priest, and they're all convicted and sentenced to death, either by hanging or being drawn and cornered, or both. So they're first rode through town, tied to a horse, hitting their heads on rocks and stuff like that. If they're not dead, they would grab them, put them up on a not a guillotine, I guess, up on the stockade, which is like where the at least I'm trying to remember the name of it. It's not stockade, I don't believe. The platform where they would hang people. They would put them up on ropes and they would choke them. They wouldn't drop them. They were just like lowering them down and then essentially choking them until near unconsciousness or near death. Then they would pick them back up and they would do it again, and they would do it again. And then they put them in between 4 horses. They tied ropes to their arms and their legs, specifically their ankles and their wrists. And they'd slap the back of a horse, and the horse would go haywire, and they would draw and quarter these men. That is essentially whenever 4 horses run in 4 different directions and they pull you apart. That is the quartering part of that. Very gruesome, very, very horrid, and very visually impactful, I would argue, to anyone who wants to go against the king. They send the 4 pieces of each of these people to different parts of England. They send them up, or the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Scotland. They would send them up to Scotland. They sent them out to the Welsh Kingdom. They sent them to, I believe, I want to say it was London. And then another part to somewhere in the colonies, I believe. Somewhere out there. essentially the four corners of the British Empire, and they say, hey, this is what happens whenever you go against the king. Don't go against the king, Catholics. And it becomes very gruesome. Henry Garnet is killed, as I said. He gets put to death. And no one really actually knows how much he knew. A lot of people say he didn't really know anything, and that he was given details of the plot through confession, but because he was a Jesuit priest and a Catholic, he is sworn to an oath by God that he cannot reveal that because of the law of absolute confidentiality for the confessionals. So that's a big reason, and it starts putting some ideas into King James I's head going forward. What's the aftermath? Gunpowder Plot. Extensive crackdowns on Catholics in England. Very, very extensive. And surprisingly, lots of anti-Catholic lots of anti-Catholic legislation, but surprisingly, the king actually left most of his loyal Catholics remain in high office for like the rest of his life. He didn't like throw them out or anything, as long as they swore. There was an oath of allegiance that he puts out. He sends it out to everybody, every single person, no matter if you're Scottish or if you're English or if you're Dutch or whoever. If you're living in England and you are a subject of the king, you have to sign an oath of allegiance now. If you are an important member of society, you have to sign this oath of allegiance. And if you do not, you are going to get killed. You are going to get fined, and if you receive the fine and you don't pay the fine, you're going to get killed. The extensive crackdowns on Catholics, they're rooting out every single major church that they can find that is underground. They start checking inside of religious buildings specifically, and start ransacking them. They tax them, actually, I believe it's one of the first times that the English actually tax the Catholic Church in England, even though they don't really have anything to go off of. And it gets really, really rough for Catholics after this. Very, very, very bad. And the people who, I think, ironically, this is something I wanted to touch on with the last thing. Ironically, the people who are condemned and put to death, they are put to death and condemned to be put to death at the same place that they tried to blow up. But it's also ironic to me that in order to make a better life for Catholics, they inadvertently led to a worse life for Catholics as a whole in England because of their traitorous acts. Instead of trying to do it peacefully, as some thought that they should, they tried to force it, just like Raleigh had before, and just like the other two priests had tried to do before, and it ends up leading to a much worse off Catholic base in England, which then leads to a lot of these Catholics either converting to Anglicanism after them being really cracked down on so hard that they don't feel like they can be a Catholic anymore, or they end up going to America. They come to the New World and start establishing Catholic colonies, which then leads to, as we know today, America and our importance of religious freedoms. A heavy area for that, like I touched on earlier in the stream, is Massachusetts. Massachusetts is made up of a lot of Catholic people. Now, a lot of them are not necessarily English Catholics, but there are a lot of Irish Catholics. Maryland's a big example of that as well. Thank you, Sacred Coral. Yes, Maryland. There are plenty of examples of heavy influence from these Catholics that are put down upon in England that come over here for a better life, and that's where we start getting the beginnings of America. And a kind of interesting, this plot doesn't really lead to anything aside from a lot of hate and hurt, but it does kind of start having the rumblings of a sort of movement in England itself that is a thing that is essentially that the people give the consent or the will to govern. It's not the king himself. He's not deemed by God. God gives us our own self-determination on who we think leads us and rules us. And it sort of starts forming these ideals in England that later on later in the 1600s leads to stuff like Adam Smith and the Two Treatises of Government and some of his works, and starts leading into more of the Enlightenment ideas that we start seeing in the 16, 17, and very early on 1800s. Or not, excuse me, not the Enlightenment. The is it the Enlightenment? I believe that's right. Hold on, I'm getting my time periods mixed up. My bad, guys. Oh my goodness, Enlightenment. Let me make sure I'm saying that right. Yes, okay, I am right. Yes, so later on in 16, 17, 1800. I had to make sure. I didn't want to say that again. I said something last time that really embarrassed me, and I didn't want to make it so that again. So the Enlightenment and stuff like that. A lot of these ideas that we start getting, a lot of them are passed down because of how James the First and some of the English rulers, or even the European rulers themselves, treated each other whenever their religions weren't respected, specifically the Christian religions. And a lot of these people understandably get frustrated. They learn from history. They read all these books. They read about the Gunpowder Plot, specifically Guy Fawkes. He becomes more of a local folk hero in England as an idea or a way to think of anti-government or anti-authoritarian means. And he becomes a figurehead to people who are anti-authoritarian or who don't like the government, and he becomes kind of like their patron saint in a way, which is very, very interesting, because some of the people who end up picking him up are not very religious at all, but very interesting. The last thing I want to touch on here for the aftermath, it actually establishes there's an act of Thanksgiving that's passed in March or May of 1606. I cannot remember which day it is, but it retroactively makes November 5th Gunpowder Treason's Day, which then turns into Guy Fawkes Day later on the line, and that was known as Bonfire Night or Guy Fawkes Night in popular culture. Now, essentially what this festival is they build a big bonfire, much like the conspirators said they were going to make a big bonfire that night. They get a Guy Fawkes dummy, and sometimes they cut it into 4 pieces, but normally they just have the Guy Fawkes dummy and they throw it up in the fire and they light it and they have a bunch of drinking and a bunch of celebration to remember the failed attempt on the king's life, which today it has kind of become a not double-edged sword, but like different groups celebrate the day for different reasons. The people who are anti-authoritarian or anti-government people, they will celebrate it as a way to remember Guy Fawkes himself being caught that night and try to use it as like an ideal to strive for, as in a way of saying like, hey, we are trying to become like Guy Fawkes but succeeding this time. Like, we want to be so courageous that we would stand up to the government or whatever. And then loyalists, or most people in England, in some of the Commonwealth countries, actually celebrate it as it's intended, which is a way to say, hey, thanks for not killing our king, idiot. Thanks for being a loser. Sorry. And there's actually a small contingent of people who are Catholics, I think specifically in England, that actually use it as a day of mourning for their relatives in the past, and for remembering other Catholics who were put upon after these failed attempts, which I find is very interesting and very more stoic and more thoughtful, I think, of a way to look at it, because it's not a great thing to celebrate, or it's also not a great thing to just wipe it away either. It's a thing to be remembered, and that's what I want to get out of what I'm teaching in these history lessons too, and I want to touch on that just a tad. I know I'm monologuing, but the real thing I want to touch on with you guys is, if I'm saying something, I want to talk about it fully. I don't want to sugarcoat it for you all. I think it's disingenuous for me to do that. And if I'm going to cover a subject, or I'm going to talk about it, I'm going to cover both sides of the subject, and I'm not going to be like, this side was good and this side was bad, because that's not necessarily always the case. And very rarely is it the case, I would argue. reality is not black and white, it is very shades of gray, and I find that holds very true, especially for history, because there are a lot of very despicable things that happen, but the reasons given behind them are somewhat understandable. I'm not saying every act of atrocity is like that, or even most of them, but there are some that behind them you need to understand the context in order to get the full picture, and painting one side or the other as being good or bad is not the way to do that. So, moving on. I just wanted to touch on that just briefly, but we will touch on that a little bit later. So, let's head on to the cultural impact of the Guy Fawkes and Gunpowder Plot. Big ones. Bonfire Night, Guy Fawkes Night. We just touched on that one. That is a huge celebration in England. I was actually talking to an Englishman today. He said that his family regularly celebrates it to remember the failed attempt, and he's actually the one who told me that there was some other groups that would go out and actually mourn and talk about that, because he said that they had Catholic neighbors, I believe, down the street that talked about it a little bit, which is very interesting. So I'm thankful to him. V for Vendetta is a huge one. That's a big one for anyone outside of the Commonwealth. That's where they hear about Guy Fawkes. The guy who is known as V wears a Guy Fawkes mask, and I think that is his lasting memory on our culture as of right now in a global sense. Guy Fawkes mask specifically is a symbol of anonymity. It's a symbol of not being recognized. It's a symbol of essentially being a voice for the voiceless, or a way to combat authoritarian means. And in V for Vendetta, if you don't know the plot of that movie, which I'm going to spoil it for you right now, it is a guy named V standing up to a neo-authoritarian kind of government in England, and he uses the 5th of November as a rallying cry, much like the Gunpowder Plotters tried to, in order to make the country rise up against their authoritarian overlords. He uses it as a way to make it a rallying cry. He goes and he fights against tyranny, but he wants others to help him, because if he does it alone, he's not going to be able to. So it becomes a thing where he's rallying up these people. It's very good comic, very good movie. Highly recommend V for Vendetta. Very interesting. Love Hugo Weaving. Elrond is my guy. He's also Agent Smith in Matrix. If you don't know who either of those are, I feel very sorry for you, because those are all three of those are great roles. Other one, Anonymous, voice for the voiceless, like we talked about. I find it funny because Anonymous is named Anonymous, right? But there was also an anonymous letter with the Gunpowder Plot. I'm not sure if they actually took inspiration from that name or from that incident that happened, but I think it is kind of funny if they didn't, that they named themselves Anonymous, and the way that they were found out is by an anonymous letter. I assume that there's some type of a line there where they decided on that, but very, very interesting nonetheless. And they usually, whenever they put out things for either hacking or showing up and showing out for people specifically who they think are being targeted, they always wear the Guy Fawkes mask, and that is like their symbol. I believe also, for American context, at the Occupy Wall Street, there was a lot of people wearing Guy Fawkes masks during that protest back in, I believe it was 2009, because they felt like they didn't have a voice. So just some quick little cultural impact stuff. Very wide-ranging, very broad, but very impactful nonetheless. So my last slide here is, does anyone have any questions? Anybody think this is interesting? Anybody want to ask me any questions about this? Please feel free to. I will leave the floor open to discussion for a couple of minutes. And I'm going to drink some water while I do it. Anybody at all? How did this type of stuff play out in the Isle of Man? The Gunpowder Plot in the Isle of Man? I mean... Oh, man, I don't know. I don't think it really got to the Isle of Man until later. I don't really think of Isle of Man as having a very heavy Catholic. Does it have a very heavily Catholic? Oh, okay. I'm not sure. I would assume it was impacted greatly. I'm not sure about the impact on the Isle of Man itself. Let me research that, and I can get back to you about it, though. I know, obviously, the Isle of Man is in between Ireland and England, but I didn't know that it was a very heavily Catholic area. That's interesting, though. Yeah, I would assume it affected them much like the rest of England. Heavy crackdowns. Oh, you mean it's Anglican? Oh, I have no idea then, dude. Oh, I thought you okay, I assumed. My bad. Sorry about that. I assumed that you said it was Catholic. Yeah, I have no idea. I don't know how it impacted the Isle of Man. I'm not gonna sit here and pretend like I do. If it was Catholic, I would assume that it impacted it quite greatly, but I can't have any historical knowledge on that just based off of that. I'm not really very well versed in Isle of Man history or theory or anything that comes from it. It was historically Catholic. Which was your I believe it was historically Catholic because if let me go down my line of reasoning here. Before the Protestant Reformation, yes, of course. I don't know what happened after the Protestant Reformation. I don't know what happened to the Isle of Man during the Anglican split either. But my assumption would be, since they are mostly people on the Isle of Man are descendants from the Celts as well as the Celts, Gaelics, and Norse people are on that island mostly, because I don't think Ireland or England really touched it so much. It's more so like something that the Vikings would touch. I believe since the Vikings all kind of converted to Christianity, which was Catholicism at the time, I would assume that they were heavily Catholic because of that. And later on, over time, I'm not really familiar with anything that happens with the Isle of Man. If it's like what they did to the Highlanders and like Catholics up in like Scotland and Ireland, I would assume that they treated them with great contentment and kind of forced their ideology on them by way of gunpoint. But I don't want to say that for certain because I don't know about it. But thinking with our brains here, if they're Catholic and then the king says, I'm no longer Catholic, and they swear fealty to the king, they are going to be at least Anglican for a time, at least ruled by Anglicans. And if they don't, I would assume that the king would probably say, okay, well, I'm going to kill you now. That's usually how that goes in English history. That's at least from my knowledge. What do you think happens if it had succeeded? If the Gunpowder Plot had succeeded, I don't quite know. There's a few ways it could go, right? If they succeeded in their goal, right, of killing the king and as many nobility as possible, and they actually have proof of it, that being a giant smoking hole in the fucking ground, I would assume that a lot more Catholics would have probably risen up, especially given how much contentment and horrid treatment that they got at the time from the English. There would probably have been a rising up. Because I believe it was Charles the First and Second, and Oliver Cromwell, which was the War of the Roses, which ends up leading into a civil war later on in the 1600s for England. Or not the War of the Roses. Is it the War of the Roses? No, it's the English Civil War, which is the fight between the parliamentarians and the royalists, which the two sides end up having like 3 different freaking wars, because Charles the First gets kicked out, and then he goes to France or Spain, and he gets an army, and then he comes back, and Charles the Second's on the throne. So they go back and kick Charles the First off the throne, and then Charles the Second's on the throne, and then they overthrow him. So, and the Charleses were different forms of religions. That's why they kept kicking them off the throne. Charles II was a Catholic, if I'm remembering right, and Charles I was an Anglican. But, or actually, that might be reversed. Flip that. I think Charles I was a Catholic. Charles II was. Let me check on that real quick for you. Let me check real quick. One second. Yes. Okay. So Charles II is Catholic. Charles I is Anglican. So whenever they're kicking each other out during this war, there's a lot of heavy fighting between both the Anglicans and the Protestants and the Catholics, because neither one wants to get ruled by the other, which ends up leading into, like I said, a lot of people leaving, or like later on. You have, you've got pilgrims that leave and come over to Plymouth Rock. You've got tons and tons and tons of different Catholics that end up coming over to like Maryland or Virginia or some of these other places. And specifically, Virginia has the House of Burgesses, and they essentially guarantee the right to be your own religion or whatever. There's religious purifications of different sorts. There's entire destructions of cultures through the years, especially Catholic culture for like Ireland and Scotland, and they throw out all the old ways, and it becomes a very messy slide here. But if they had succeeded, I think you just kind of see that type of stuff happening earlier. Protestants were in a very, very strong place without their figurehead, without their king, without any of their royal, because usually the Lord of or the House of Lords has prominent members, especially back then, prominent members of families that are very important to England. If these people get killed, a lot of those families are going to be fucking furious. But at the same time, the Scots had a lot of power, and they had a very heavy Catholic force, and they end up fighting later on in that Civil War anyways. A lot of Scottish people come down and fight. So I think you just see a quicker Civil War for England. I think that the end result stays the same. I don't think just because James I didn't get killed that it really changes much, because in fact him and Elizabeth did more to exacerbate a civil war between Catholics and Protestants than most others had for 300 or 400 years. Or excuse me, not 300 or 400 years. I'm trying to remember when Henry IV or Henry VIII was king, since he established the church in like the 1500s. So yeah, 300 years or 150 years almost of peace, or somewhat peace, between the Anglicans and the Catholics, or the Protestants and the Catholics now. Had he dialed back some of his measures, I think it would have not led to a war. I think if he just allowed for people to have free religion, like if they just let religious freedom happen like they did in some of these other kingdoms, I think you would have seen a lot better off people in terms of later on in English history. At least there wouldn't have been a civil war if he had backed off a little bit. But Elizabeth especially, and then followed by him with his 3 attempts on his life that they made, even though all 3 were unsuccessful. And then there's a further one, I think it's 1615, which is another plot, which I believe I have it written down here somewhere. It is called... let me try to find it. It's like the Burgess plot or something like that. What was the name of that? Let's see here. Whoop. I'll find it in a little bit. But there was another attempt on his life in the 1615s that really led to him getting really, really, really into persecuting the Catholics heavily. And also, I want to go ahead and put this in here. because I am so excited that I actually made something for once with my life. Thank you to Canva for helping me out with that. I just want to put this here. This is my own creation, guys. I made this. I made this for you all. Right here. Boom. That is the Gunpowder Plot. That is what that is. And if you want to zoom in on it, which I don't know if I can. Oh, didn't want to start from the beginning. We're going to go back. There. I have all the important dates listed on here. So James I ascends, 24th of March, 1603. Mid-1603 is when the byplot happens. July of 1603 is when the main plot happens. 1604 is February 1604 is the Adult Parliament. July 1604 is the discussion of the Great Contract, which I didn't touch on and I want to. That was the negotiation for a financial settlement after the Adult Parliament happened. James was going to be giving up royal prerogatives, essentially royal permissions, like a way for him to kind of release some of his power to Parliament. That was like how they kind of checked him a bit. So he ends up giving a bit of his power to Parliament, and in exchange, Parliament gives him his money that he used. So they end up upping taxes, and then that's where we get heavy inflation and some of that stuff we touched on earlier. November 5th, 1605 is whenever we have the Gunpowder Plot. And 27th of January, 1606 is the trial and execution of the conspirators. And then the 5th of November Act happens on the 27th of May, 1606. And that is where we have Guy Fawkes Nights. Here's my sources. I only have 2 of mine. And yeah. But getting back to what we were discussing, though. Had James dialed it back in just a tad, this stuff would not have happened. But this is history, so we're looking back at it with, hindsight. Did they know about this back then? Did they know what was going to happen? No. Could they see 70 years into the future? Definitely not. But I think, understandably, if you are the king and you have attempts on your life from a certain group, especially back with the knowledge that they had back in the 1600s, right? Like, these people were not super smart overall in terms of like how things like this work, or they just weren't looking at themselves through a lens of criticism. I think you would see a lot less of this stuff throughout history if they had more modernized thinking, but I don't like saying that because I don't really think it doesn't add anything. Like, it doesn't change the fact that it happened. It doesn't really, how do I say it? It doesn't, I'm trying to think of like the right word to use here. Looking back on it with our vision of what things should be, looking at it from our lens, we tend to do this a lot with a lot of history, and it's not a good way to look at history, because if we're going to apply moralism or our moral standards to people who did not have the same sets of morals and who thought certain things were okay while other things were not, I think you're going to have a lot of problems with history, and I think it leads to an overall misunderstanding of how these people act, and I think it leads to a misunderstanding of who you are and where you come from as a people, or who they were and where they come from as a people, and it's very disingenuous for somebody to go back and look at it and use a moralist viewpoint for certain things in history, especially like marrying off like your kids in like a Crusader Kings game, right? Like, I think whenever you go back and you try to apply stuff like, and obviously this is not the case for every single like thing that's happened, so don't take me out of context here, but I think if you try to like be like, oh, they were marrying at like 12 years old back then, that's okay. No, not in today's standards. No, definitely not. But if you're saying back then they married at 12 years old and somebody goes, oh my God, I can't believe they did that. And it's like, well, their life expectancy was very short. And also, that's just like whenever you started working the fields as an adult, or as a quote unquote adult at that time, the way that we have learned about science has expanded our thought process on this, and it's become a newer thing that like 18's like an adult, right? Because I mean, there were kids that were out there tilling the fields in the 1300s that were like 6 years old up till they were like 35, and then they'd kick over and die. Or even as soon as, honestly, as recent as like the Industrial Revolution, like towards the start of the 1900s, you had like 10, 11-year-old kids out in factories working, and like they would get married at like 14, 15, 16, 17. It's very hard to look back and be like, from our point of view, if we're using our moral sense of like what's right and wrong, it's very hard to go back and be like, or it's easy for us to go back and be like, oh, that's wrong. But I think it's more genuine to go back and be like, oh, wow, that was a different time period. They did stuff differently back then. Even though it's messed up in our standards, makes sense for the time. So not all cases are like that. Not every single, thing that has ever happened in history. So do not, again, take me out of context with this. But I want everyone to be very, very aware of how certain things pan out and how certain things work. If you're a king, specifically like James is, and you are getting assaulted by a group of people on a regular basis, or you're getting attempts at your life through people at a regular basis, there is some argument to be made, especially during that time with what they knew, that he should have oppressed the Catholics more, because they thought that the more of an iron fist you put down on people, the more in line they were going to toe. And there were examples of that through English history. But at the same time, there were also examples of if you were more lenient with people, they actually listened to what you had to say. Because guess what? People are more likely to come to you with milk and sugar than they are with a brutal fist to the face. But again, that's applying, I would argue, our thought process on that time. But anyways, I'm done monologuing for now. Let's see, what were we saying in chat? Everyone knows these concepts of purification of areas or purification of self, especially just inherent holy areas, spread more. What the hell are you talking about? That's so out of context right now. Oh my god. I really like Catholic places of veneration in Ireland, especially. Oh, you're talking about. Okay, sorry about that. I didn't read the thing above it. My bad. My fault. I think it depends. You cannot completely cut it out because nothing would ever progress if we didn't. Yeah, but that's like everyone knows that. Okay, well, I don't know what we're talking about here. And you can say something is wrong and also believe something isn't relative. Yeah, I agree. I think that's true. I'm not saying that you can't. I'm just saying I feel like there's a lot of people who try to go back and do history who are not historians or are not understanding of the time period, I guess. I think it's a lack of just understanding of the time period itself, more likely than not, where people will go back and be like, well, they did this back then, so it's okay if we do it to them now. Or, well, this thing happened to this group of people back then, so now we should make them do X thing now. It's like, well, no, it's not. That's hundreds of years ago, right? Like, we're talking about, like, this is going to get to a very messy area for some people, I think. So I'm going to leave it here. But just saying it's odd. Everyone inherently sorts of knows this, so you end up looking really insane when you're not trying to. I don't think, again, I'm not saying that people don't know this. I'm just speaking from my point of view. I'm just monologuing. But anyways. So, let's move on. We are, oh god, we're at 2 hours and 6 minutes. Shit, fuck it. We're going to keep rolling till... We'll keep rolling to the top of the hour, I think, if everyone's okay with that. The person itself delivering message. Okay. I think we keep rolling to the top of the hour. Is everyone cool with that? I think we're good. I think we're good to keep rolling. I don't know what we're going to talk about, but if anyone has any more questions, I'd be happy to happy to talk about them. Also, my sources, I need to go back and read them to you because I forgot to put them on there. My fault. They are... One second. Sources? Source? Where's your source? My source is my crack pipe. Can I say that on stream? I hope so. My sources are a lovely book by Mr. Philip J. Jones called The Italian City-State from Commune to Signoria. It was in the Oxford University Press in 1997, as well as Mr. Trevor Dean. His book, Land and Power in Late Medieval Ferrara, the Rule of the Est 1350 to 1450. And there was another book that I think I forgot to put in there as well that for some reason I cannot find now. So I will add that in and I will tweet it out later. So, yeah. How are we feeling about that? Was that I think it's pretty solid. I think it's pretty good little thing that we had there. I liked it. Gunpowder Plot. I learned a lot about it just from research, so I'm happy to talk about it with you all. It's not super close to my heart, but I think sharing it with people, like learning it, I think once you learn something, like if you're reading through something and you're like writing it down on paper or you're typing it up, you add a certain amount of knowledge, I think, to yourself. I think there was a thing that somebody told me that was like, if you write something down, you learn like it's something like 10% or 25% of what you learn, right? If you read it, it's another percentage. If you write it down, it's a certain percentage. But if you teach it, you actually retain more knowledge. So I'm glad that I can share it with you all and kind of get it out there and share it with you all. Because number one, if you guys learn it and you're interested in it, by all means, come back, keep asking questions or whatever. Famous Benjamin Franklin quote? I don't even know. But it could be Benjamin Button for all I know. I'm terrible with quotes. I don't know who said it. I think there's also this common thing too in history where people like attribute quotes to certain people, and it's really funny to me when it's always like a Zig Ziglar quote or someone like that, and then somebody just posts like a fucking picture of like Aristotle or some shit like that, and they're like, man, Aristotle was really thinking. He was really cooking with this one. It's fucking Zig Ziglar like inspirational quotes, kind of like what people do with the damn pictures of the Peaky Blinders guy and like badass quotes that they like posted on their stuff. They're like, yeah, this is badass, dude. I guarantee you he said this. Guaranteed. Definitely not taken from somewhere else. That makes no sense. I hate it. Like, I think trying to do this. You think people tried to do this, and because they are bad at talking and communicating, they essentially are like, guys, I was back then. It's like, yeah, no shit, okay. Usually people feel defensive because they feel attacked. That's very obvious. I don't know. People feel defensive because they feel attacked? Are you talking about the people who say that? I don't know. I don't know about that one. Should just issue the person themselves. Oh, I already read that. I think it depends on what we're talking about. I also think it depends on who you're saying is defensive or who is attacking. From a root of bad talking and prose and tone. Yes and no. I think the people that I'm thinking about specifically, not to touch too much into the political realm, there are people who will use active history from like Rome or other places and use it as moral justification for things that happen now. And that's as much into the politics part of that as I'm going to go. But stuff like that people do, and I see it a lot, especially in academia nowadays, which is scary to me as somebody who enjoys history and learns a lot and likes it. But the people who kind of get into that point of argumentation are not the type of people that I really enjoy talking to about history, because they'll use that and they'll always rope it back in to their ideology, and then it becomes essentially a battle of actual historical fact versus like fanciful political fiction, which is not how history works and not how it should work. Because if you're going to pick and choose and cherry pick examples throughout history of which you're going to base your entire theory off of and use historical evidence, but then if somebody else brings up another historical evidence to refute the fact, it turns into essentially a thing where a person who likes history, like I do, would get into an argument with somebody who doesn't really know the history but is like using these cherry picked examples, and they essentially stick their fingers in their ear and they go, la 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 la, I can't hear you, I'm not listening, I'm not gonna listen to this because I don't believe it. And, like, it makes no sense. Like, it turns into a shit show. And it also, like, there's certain parts of history that are up for debate, which is okay. There's no big deal about that. But whenever you're talking about historical fact, if you're going to get into actual history and you're not going to cover entire parts of it, or you are going to cherry pick examples and then not cover other things because it refutes your point, or the other thing that I really, really despise is whenever people try to teach history and they purposefully go out of their way to avoid saying things that actually are not so much offensive, but could trigger someone. And I understand why they do it, because they're trying to get everybody involved with it. But at the end of the day, it makes you look really silly for doing it. And that's kind of how I felt after I did the D-Day stream. And I didn't say like Nazi or Hitler, because I felt really dumb for not doing it. Because to me, that's not who I am as a person. Because if I'm going to talk about the history, like I said earlier, I'm going to talk about the history, the good, the bad, and the ugly. Like, it's fine. But there's certain people who don't even who won't cover that, and it gets really bad, especially whenever you're going onto YouTube, and YouTube kind of censors talking about history a lot, to where you have to bleep out certain words, or you have to cover up certain insignias, or you have to jump through all these hoops and jump up through like a ring of fire, and then over a like parade of sharks and a tiny pool, and then it gets into like a whole thing. That's what I have a bigger problem with, I think, overall. But I just wanted to make that very clear. I was just monologuing and I wanted to get into it. Let's see. What were you saying, though? I think it's an issue of history people who do not understand psychology, communication, or even how we study humans in clinical studies, and how words affect everything. It's interesting. Like, it's insane how people do not want to educate themselves on basic psychology and want to be teachers or historians. It's weird. Right. I think... Okay. Here's a point of contention I think me and you are going to have on that. I understand where you're coming from with that. I understand the psychology aspect and the communication aspect of certain things, especially communication, because you want to make it very clear what you're talking about. And maybe I didn't do that before, but for this specifically, I want to make it very concrete and clear that I am not talking about horrid human atrocities that are very obviously bad. Whenever I'm saying there's good and bad and various shades of gray on some of these things, I'm talking about things like wars between certain nations. I'm talking about, covering certain events in history where there is mostly war. I think most of it's war. I think a lot of it comes from that. But if you're going to talk about something, you need to talk about it, right? And I understand the historical context of it. I understand the communication part of it. I understand the psychology of it from a human aspect. But if you're going to apply human psychology whenever teaching this, right, that's a good thing overall. But I think it also sometimes affects people too much whenever they care too much about the psychology of stuff, where they don't teach the whole subject in a way that it should be taught. There are certain things that you actually need to reflect on as a human being that we have done that are horrid, that can be done without somebody guilt tripping you into doing it. Or someone could teach you something and then have a genuine reflection within yourself about that thing, or have the conversation about it. Because I think a lot of history teachers don't actually encourage discussion. I think they just want people to listen to them or go through the textbook or go off of Wikipedia articles or whatever, and then listen about a subject, and then not have you critically think about said subject, and it becomes a even worse conversation, because then people who actually do have questions for it start asking questions, and those people don't know how to answer. And if it's a teacher itself, like a teacher themselves cannot answer a historical question like that, like that is somewhat alarming. And I think a lot of times it's like people are like, they just like wipe away questions. It's like, oh, okay, well, I think we can sit here and answer actual questions for people if they're genuine, if they're being genuine, if they're trying to genuinely ask a question, especially a student. Like I'm talking in this example, like high schoolers, right? If you're gonna ask a question about like Nazi Germany, like what did they do to this group of people or whatever, and a teacher cannot definitively answer that like especially a history teacher cannot definitively answer that question, that is a problem. That is a big problem. And it is important for you to know that, because if you do not answer questions, it leads to people being very skeptical of what you're teaching them. And that leads to people questioning if your history knowledge is good. And then that leads to them questioning history itself, because you are supposed to be the authority on the subject. And when authorities do not have simple answers to simple questions like that, or even if they have a complex answer to a simple question, it becomes a wider problem within the public, specifically for history. History is a huge part of who we are as a people, and if you do not remember it, and you do not learn it properly, and you do not get answers to these questions, then people are going to genuinely start doing the same things that we're trying to teach about in history, that ends up leading to the fall of people as a society. And I think you see this a lot with like Rome, like the fall of Rome versus the fall of like like Napoleon's empire, or the fall of the Byzantine Empire. There's various things that people and leaders can take from history, and they, instead of studying history, they'll be more involved with a political science or a psychology or a something else, which is okay. And I'm not saying that's not a subject that you need to study, but history is very important, especially if you're going to be leading people, or if you're going to be talking to people, or you're going to be answering questions about it. If you don't know basic things like that and then try to teach, and you don't answer questions, that's a problem. But anyways, I feel like I'm going in circles with this, that in my own head, like trying to like make sure I'm following every point. But good discussion though. I do approve of the discussions. Very nice. We had a kid at my high school who came from a school who kept them very cushion. They went from a high school that taught like no various viewpoints. It was crazy, to one that emphasized various viewpoints. Yeah, I think that's very startling, I think, too, for kids nowadays. That's kind of why I like talking to people about history. I know history is a very boring subject, and I'm not the most exciting person in terms of tone or I guess videos either, because I haven't put anything out yet. I do have something that's very good in the works though. But also I had a little meeting today. I'll talk to you guys about this in a second, but we'll talk about it. Where was I at? Oh my goodness. This is what happens to me. My ADHD kicked in. Oh my goodness. Oh yes, that's what it was. I think there is a genuine thing in schools, especially right now in America, where you go from like a elementary school, or you go from a middle school where you don't learn like hardly any history, or if you do learn history, it's like very subjective, like very very short like spurts about like Rome. It literally goes from like Bronze Age to Egypt to Rome, or Greece, and then to Rome, and then after that you don't learn much else. And then once you get to high school, you start getting taught the same exact thing again. And then after that thing, after you learn about Rome again, you start learning about like, I'm trying to remember like what's after. Like, you do, in my AP Euro test, we covered, or my AP Euro and my AP World History class, we covered pretty much everything, which is why I liked it. But in AP Euro specifically, you essentially go from Rome, and then the Dark Ages happened, and then you touch on a little bit of like Norse history with England, and then you touch on a little bit of the creation of England, like as the England we know today. So like Normandy, or not Normandy, William of Normandy coming over and conquering. So he becomes William the Conqueror, and then all that. And then afterwards, you learn most everything past that. But there's like huge gaps in our history where we don't even learn about them in high school or middle school or elementary school, anywhere. Like, I can ask a random person on the street what happened between 0 AD and the fall of Rome, and they will tell me Jesus was born and died, right? And then maybe they know the Great Schism between the East and the West. And that's about it. I don't think most people know Charlemagne. I don't think that most people know about the fall of Rome. I don't think that most people know about the rise of the Goths. I don't think they know about Attila the Hun. I don't think they know about the OG Vikings, like coming in and raiding, like going down to like Italy and Paris and raiding those places. I don't think they know about the Islamic expansion in the early half of the millennia. It's very interesting to like genuinely look at our I guess our way that we teach kids in America. I think this is maybe just overall. Maybe it's just because I'm the autistic ADHD history streamer here, but it's very worrying to me that we don't teach anything in that period, and we call it the Dark Ages. Like, it comes from like a place of like, I think, absolute ignorance that we don't do that, because there's so much history packed in that 800 years, or well, excuse me, not 800, like 475 years. And then after the 475 years, you have another several hundred years of very interesting history that, you know, maybe we lost a lot of, but there's other parts of the world that are interesting in history, and we don't teach about any of it. It goes like what I said earlier. It goes, right, the ancient like Mesopotamia or early like humans. And then you go like Indus River Valley, Mesopotamia, and then Mississippi River Valley, and some of those people. You touch on the Chinese a little bit for Han Dynasty, and then you go Egypt, Greece, Rome. Maybe Persia's in there too. And then from there, you don't talk about the fall of Rome. You just go straight into like the Norse, and then you go into creation of England, and then you go into like after that, probably talking about maybe the Reconquista and some of that other stuff. But then for Americans, we only learn like after that. That's just talking about European history. That's not even talking about American history. American history, we literally just go Christopher Columbus, and then early settlers, colonialization, the colonies, freedom from Great Britain, 1812, Louisiana Purchase, and then from Louisiana Purchase we skip over 40 fucking years of history or something like that, 50, 60 years of history to go to the Civil War, and then after that we barely talk about World War I, and then you talk about World War II. You don't touch on Vietnam, you don't touch on Korea, you don't touch on any of the other conflicts we were in, you don't touch on any of the historical achievements aside from the space race. You do touch on the space race, and then you definitely don't get into like the 90s or 2000s about any of it. So I'm just talking about I'm spurging out about my the way that I was taught history. I think it's heavily for a lot of public schools, like that's how that works. So let's see, what were you saying? I don't know. Gosh, I don't know. Even some of the people at my high school, America was a huge unawareness of other countries issue. Yeah, that's true. Like, I knew a kid who didn't know where Italy or Rome was. That's a problem. Or even friends of mine, because due to them being from the U.S. with no multinational people in their family, they were just very unaware of anything outside the U.S., and that's a result of U.S.'s inability to be comfortable, in my opinion. I don't know if it's an inability to be comfortable. I think it's a thing of, I think other countries are concretely aware of America, number one, because it takes up like most of a continent with two other countries. But not only just that, I think a lot of people know America because of how influential our culture is throughout the world. I think that's why people start to know why other countries exist. I think that's why Japan is very prominent in the culture now. I think Japan is really well known. Tokyo is very well known. I think South Korea is very well known now because of stuff like K-pop. I think whenever you get influenced by other cultures heavily, that's when you start doing that. But I think maybe that's what you were trying to go for. But the school went from pre-Columbian to Columbian history. I don't know what you're on about. Yes, you do. IDK. Because we go into 2000s and 90s for sure. Well, I mean, that might be in your school. That, again, I don't know. That's the other problem with America is we don't have like a standardized like curriculum for learning history or anything for that matter, I'd argue. But if you're going into like if you're going into a AP class, I would say I remember specifically which one I very much disliked about my history class. AP World History. We were supposed to learn about the Green Revolution. The Green Revolution, from what I understand, was the thing in the 60s, 70s, or it's 50s, 60s, and 70s that brought about so much advanced farm equipment that it literally almost quadrupled our world's food supply, which is why we have such a humongous population now. That is a very, very important part of who we are today, and we don't even talk about it in AP Euro class, or AP World History class, excuse me. That is a problem. That's a big problem. I don't know why they didn't either. But again, I think AP classes help out a lot. I wish every class was just an AP class, and I think AP classes should be more advanced, but that's my prerogative. That's just because I'm very super autistic with the history stuff, I think. Like, maybe it's also because I'm a boomer. I don't know. I'm not that much older than most people, I don't think. But maybe that's my ignorance of, like, the current day history system or whatever. But I'm reflecting on my time as a kid. Like, every book is, like, history, then bam, 9/11. I remember reading a book the other day. It said history, bam, 9/11. Yep. That makes... like, I get what you're saying. Like, yeah, we cover 9/11 because it's a significant part of American history. That's why. I think what I'm arguing more so is, like, we don't cover things that are, I would argue, are significant and have causes and effects later on throughout society. But maybe, again, I don't know. Maybe I just don't... maybe I'm just not hip with what the kids are learning nowadays in school. But I just think from what I remember in school, it went that, and then once you get past World War II, it was like a little bit of Cold War, space race, specifically the space race. That was the only part of the Cold War we covered. We covered Berlin Wall, space race, and then nothing. 9/11 for like 2 seconds on 9/11. It's usually on 9/11 that you learn about 9/11 too. That's the crazy part. That's like the really weird way that we learn about that. Like, a lot of people I know did too, so I find it weird you didn't. Well, I don't know. Maybe it was your school. Maybe it was your school. Maybe it's your state school. I don't know. I'm just basing this off of my knowledge. Okay, well, that was a fun little conversation. I hope I didn't bore anybody here too bad. I think it's time we find a little friend to send you all over to, because it's closing up time for me. I have been on stream for 2.5 hours, and I have work tomorrow. So, I hope you all enjoyed our little discussion about the Gunpowder Plot. I hope you all found it very interesting. I hope you liked our little discussion there towards the end. Sorry for monologuing so much. If you did like it, and you think you have a friend who might like it as well, please send them my way. Send them to my Twitter, send them to my Twitch, send them to my YouTube. And we will certainly get them wrapped up in here. Other thing is, we're in the process of making a Discord. So I will be sending out the Discord link probably within the next week or so. Like I said last week, no stream Saturday. Going to a con. Stream again next week, Wednesday. After Wednesday, though, I don't know if Saturday I'm going to be able to stream because it's going to be really late, and I get in really late on Saturday to Korea. So I'm going to say no stream that Saturday either. But the next week, we will be on an alternative schedule after that. So after the 9th of August, so write that in your calendars, kiddies. After the 9th of August, we are going to be on an alternative schedule for 2 weeks. 2 weeks. Up until I believe I come back on the 18th or 19th. I can't remember which. One of those two. And then after that, I will be on vacation. And then after that, we should be on regular scheduled programming for the rest of the year. I'm going through a lot of life events at the moment, as you can tell. Work and moving and all this crap. And I appreciate you all sticking with me through it all. I know it's been a very hectic schedule. And I know that my spurgy, dumb ADHD head ass is not the greatest with updating people or telling them where I'm going. But I wanted you all to let you all know what the plans are for the next little bit. Discord will be open soon, like I said, so hit us up in there. Gonna put out a video. I have a great idea for a video that just came to me today, and I am going to pounce on the opportunity to make it. I will try my hardest to get that out before the end of August, if I can. If not, please do not hold my feet to the fire on that one, because that one's gonna be hard to get to. But other than that, though, if you enjoyed this stream, please give me a follow on Twitter. Please come in and subscribe to the YouTube channel. Anything would be much appreciated. If you want to keep up with events, Twitter's in my bio, so is the YouTube. I will be making any updates on the schedule or anything like that on Twitter. So if you want to keep up with those, please go over there. Other than that, if you guys have any suggestions for something you'd like to see or something you'd like to see covered, please put it in the suggestion box down below. If you have any ideas or thoughts about how I can update the stream or change it a bit, please, again, suggestion box down at the bottom, and we'll add it in. 8 more people, and we are going to be affiliated, which I am so excited for. I am so happy that people are sticking around and actually enjoying the stream. I really do appreciate every single one of you. I know sometimes we get in the weeds a little bit with some of the history, and if you don't follow along, I get it. I know some of you just listen to background, but I do, like I said, I do really appreciate it, and want to say thanks for blessing me with the opportunity to come in here and teach you guys a little bit of something. But for me, I think that'll be it for the night. So I'm going to go ahead and find us a little friend to go raid, and we will put in our message. Mr. Mad Lad, that's your cue, baby. Winky face. I hope he hears that. I hope he heard it. I really hope he heard it. I don't think he heard it. All right, that's fine. I'll post it. I'll post it. No worries. Oh, he heard me. Oh, baby. What a lad. What an absolute lad. You're an absolute Chad, man. Thank you. I appreciate you. Oh, also, if we do get affiliated, I don't know if you guys saw, but if you guys have anybody who you like and want to subscribe to right now, I think there's like some type of like, I think discounted rate or something on the subscriptions. Obviously, I can't get subscriptions, so don't subscribe to me. Or you can't subscribe to me, but if you have somebody who you like, additional bonus on top of the percentage off is there's also a 3-month long Apple TV membership with it. So another good reason to go subscribe to your favorite content creators. So very cool. I'm trying to figure. I'm a boomer, dude. I'm a boomer. Oh God, put me out to pasture already. Good God Almighty. Okay, here I am, finally here. Jesus Christ. All right, let's find us a little friend to raid real quick. Let me check. What we got here? We got Dead Sun Prime, who is modeling in Unreal Engine. We got Hysteria V. Don't know them. Let's see. I wonder if there's anybody who's doing. Is there anybody doing history? I'll check if there's anyone doing history. If there is, I'll probably go with them. Let's see. Oh, that's that one guy. Yeah, it's funny. They're streaming Civ 6 though. Oh, I don't know if I want to do that. Oh well. I have an idea of somebody. I think I have an idea of somebody. We go with Cleo. Cleo streaming. Yay, Cleo. All right. So, everybody, please put on your raid messages. We bring the warmth of the forge and coffee, of course. Please slap that on there. Make sure that I've got everything added in here real quick. Make sure that we're streaming over there. Okay. We are going to raid Miss Cleo. Very enjoyed her content for a long time. So we're going to go over there and raid her. I appreciate you all showing up, even the lurkers who are probably not even here listening right now. But if you are, please slap that little thing there into her chat room whenever you get in. And we are going to end it here tonight, folks. So, appreciate you as always. Already shared out my shout-outs and everything. Appreciate Sacred Coral for having a great conversation tonight. Thank you very much. Shout out to PowerPoint team, which is me. Shout out to Mad Lad for making the awesome raid message. And yeah, guys, we will see you next Wednesday. Love you all. Be safe. Have an enjoyable weekend. If you're going to a con or anything this weekend, please, please, please be safe. Drink lots of water. Get some snacks. Whatever you need to do. And love you. Talk to you soon. Bye-bye. Goodbye. Oh no.
Oh, hello. Hello, Max. Thank you for the raid. Sorry, I literally stepped away to get a cup of tea. Max Forge VT. How was your stream, Max? Did you have fun? You were just chatting. Did you get a high score? Welcome. Welcome, welcome. Oh wait, I got raided 38 minutes ago by Maria? Oh no! Hang on, no one told me. Oh, fuck. I'm so sorry, Emma. I was in the BRB screen, I think. I think I was. I'm so sorry. My bad. I'm an idiot. Oh no, Emma, I'm so sorry. Ah! If only I had a mod to do that for me. You were covering the Gunpowder Plot. Ooh. Gunpowder Treason and plots. Remember. The 5th of November. It's cool time. Cool. It's an interesting time in history. I need to put my phone on charge. That's really cool. Thank you. Thank you for rating, Max. I hope you had a wonderful time talking about history. And then I need to do the other shout out now. I'm so sorry, Emma. And I will say thank you to the people who, yeah, I have to wait for that one, but I can do this one. Thank you, the raid, Emaria. I hope Factorio went well. I hope you had fun with Factorio. I'm so sorry for not being here when you raided and doing the shout out. My apologies.